Ironically, when the technical decision came around, and I was actually at that point the technical leader, so I made that decision, we chose React. But then React announced hooks. And hooks, funnily, looked exactly like Solid.
So Ryan, can you tell me a little bit about your journey into web development and how that led you to create SolidJS?
Sure, yeah. I've been working in web for ages. It's funny, I actually wanted to be a game developer, but I was playing in bands and I needed a website. And then when I tried to get a job, I was working for free for these game companies, and I actually found a paying job actually making websites. So I mean, this is the 90s, and the web was new and every business needed them.
Exactly.
I mean, and honestly, I just kind of hacked it together and just did that. And that actually led me to working on full stack in like the .NET Microsoft world all through the 2000s. But in terms of how I got to where I am today, big change happened around 2009-ish. Most of my team didn't want to work with JavaScript. They kind of didn't want to dirty their hands with it. They preferred using their C# or VB.
Yep.
And I kind of became the JavaScript guy on the team. I was making like jQuery plugins, and I happened to move to a different team, and they wanted to try something new, Knockout.js. So that was 2010, and I saw it and just like fell in love. It was like returning to like where my roots, where I was just using like a little bit of JavaScript in the client, and I've been hooked ever since. Knockout.js introduced me to the idea of reactivity. They call them observables, not to get them mixed up with something like RxJS, but basically what we know today to be signals. From there, I just continued on product teams, made websites using signals-based technology. I worked in production on a Knockout app for like 7 years. And it was during that time period that I was working there, seeing that Knockout not getting updated anymore, that I decided that I would like go and create my own JavaScript framework, just actually hopefully be used in my company one day. Ironically, when the technical decision came around, and I was actually at that point the technical leader, so I made that decision, we chose React.
Nice. So in the early days of creating SolidJS, what were the problems in gaining like community adoption and communicating to the world that, hey, this is actually a cool thing?
I mean, it was interesting because, as I said, I made it for myself initially, which meant that like
all the best things are initially made for yourself.
Right. So like I didn't really care, honestly. I didn't open source it at first. I thought I'd use it in my company, as I said, but obviously there's a risk when people aren't aware of it. And honestly, what got me to open source it was I saw a benchmark, and it was always kind of bugged me, like some of the claims about performance in React and other libraries. And I'm like, no, this approach can be really fast. And I literally open sourced it to put in a benchmark to show people that it was the fastest approach. And I succeeded at doing that. And then next thing I know, I mean, that would have been enough and I would have left it alone. But then React announced hooks. And hooks, funnily, looked exactly like Solid. Like, you have to understand the world that I built Solid in, there was class components still.
Right.
And, some people are just migrating off mixins and all that kind of stuff. And
I was there, yeah.
And so for me, when I built Solid, this whole like function component with state inside, like the way we're familiar with hooks these days, didn't exist. So Solid looked completely different than React initially. I mean, I did borrow the JSX from them, but then they actually introduced hooks after. And then I was like, that's kind of interesting. I think this might be better than hooks. And it took me all the way to that point to actually decide to make a community. And then, I mean, that's a weird place to be because the front end world had determined that they were really kind of fixed in already. Like when I talk to people, there's like two sides. There's like React on one side and then like Vue and maybe Svelte just coming out like on this other side. And they were like, this, you're either single file components or you're like React, you either have like this re-render thing or you do like kind of reactivity compiler thing. And I was like, why can't we do both? And that was not taken too well at first because people liked that line in the sand. They were like, it was like the camps. And I was like, if we look at both sides, we can actually benefit from what each other's learned. And that's that was a difficult line to walk originally, because no one really wanted that sort of solution, and I don't think most people got it. Like, it's very obvious when your syntax is different, when people are like, oh, look, this is like, you can just use JavaScript looking variables or something. But when people look at it in Solid, they just saw React and they're like, I don't get it. So
Right.
it was, and it wasn't because I was trying to copy React. I mean, I learned a lot of stuff from React. It was just that we used JSX and we used primitives and function components. It literally looked like React hooks, even though we were already doing it that way. So it was definitely challenging at first. I wasn't also on social media. I didn't have a previous framework. A lot of the guys had worked on other frameworks when they did this stuff. Like Rich from Svelte had a framework called Reactive before Svelte. Evan, you worked on Meteor for a while. So like, these guys had experience. I was just this nobody
followers.
guy who came out and was like, you guys, we can do this completely different way, and it's actually really good.
But did you proactively say, I want to build a community, or did you just put this thing out there and people came to it, or a mixture?
Yeah, it was a kind of a mixture. What had happened was no one understood what I was talking about. I signed up for Twitter, I remember, in 2020, and
Good year.
and yeah, or sorry, I guess it was the end of 2019. It was right before that. And I like posted stuff because I was trying to get in the conversation, and people just didn't understand what I was talking about. And part of that's on me. I'm not always the best at explaining things. And I realized I needed to educate people before they could even meet me where I was at. I needed to actually build up the education. People didn't look at other frameworks the way that I looked at other frameworks. They didn't like see the same things the way I saw them. So I started writing. I've started writing articles. Once I saw hooks, I actually started writing articles, a lot of pro React articles on why you want to use hooks, but also why signals are powerful. And the community actually grew out of actually education. Like, basically, we were a community built to understand how all the JavaScript frameworks worked. That was my own experience. When I worked on the benchmarks, I kind of helped the people who were making the benchmarks and to review all the different implementations. So over the course of the time, I actually studied how over 80, 90 different JavaScript frameworks worked to mechanically. And there were a lot of similarities and difference and different places of optimization. So I spent a lot of time looking at other frameworks and then taking what I learned and trying to teach people. That's what led me to live streaming and doing that. It was about education, and the community came because the kind of people that we attracted were other people interested. Like, if you go into Solid's Discord, you will find a lot of other framework authors, which is a kind of funny thing. You'll find people they'll be like, oh no, I can do this better than Solid. All this.
Right.
I encourage that discussion because that's where the innovation comes
Exactly.
from.
Competition.
Yeah.
I distinctly remember the day that I read through your Solid tutorial thing, and I was like, this is weird. This doesn't, and then a light bulb went off, and I was just like, oh crap. This is a totally different way to manipulate the DOM. It's very interesting. To me, it's a inversion.
Right.
Of
Yeah, and it really is an inversion. A lot of times, it's a lot easier when you're thinking procedurally, imperatively, to think about writes, to think about I'm going to set the state and it's going to redo the thing. I'm going to update. You could call update directly. And Solid was everything's about reads. It's about understanding what your data is in your app. It's all about where things are read. What do things depend on? It is really an inversion, but I mean, it's a very powerful, once you can wrap your head around it, it is very powerful. And we weren't the first ones to do this, as I said, Knockout had a lot of the characteristics. It wasn't as fully fleshed out as we are today, but all things evolve in time. And I think that for some reason in the middle, we went from a zone where stuff like Knockout was considered too magical and to basically the magic catching up in the virtual DOM world, and us going hey, maybe it's time to look again at stuff that we had kind of maybe prematurely dismissed.
Exactly. That makes a lot of sense. What are some common misconceptions and misunderstandings that people coming from other frameworks fall into when adopting Solid?
I mean, I do spend a lot of my time educating, so this is one of those places. I think the first one is actually a lot around signals. There's a lot of misconceptions around signals, which are our core primitive that we use in Solid. Right. First of all, it was very common back in the day for signals to be paired with like two-way binding libraries and immutability. And there's this like perception in people's mind that, you're entering like the butterfly effect, where like someone updates something over here and something else goes, and then the whole thing just,
Like a spreadsheet, you change
well,
a
I mean, the
cell here
spreadsheet,
and then
right. And to be fair, mechanically it does work like a spreadsheet. But if you built a spreadsheet, like just picture in your head, if you built a spreadsheet and lots of cells all depend on each other and they just ping ponged off each other all over the place until they settled, that would be a very inefficient program. No one, if you know that what you're solving is a spreadsheet, you're going to build something to purpose to actually make sure that you have those guarantees. And the problem is the early systems didn't have those guarantees. But honestly, ever since MobX, I think a lot of React developers are familiar with MobX.
Yep.
We've had those guarantees in signal libraries, and the truth is, MobX has things called actions which kind of restrain where you can write. And in Solid, the one thing I did actually get from React hooks was the tuple returned from the primitive.
That is clever.
The
Yep.
read-write segregation. I was looking for a solution like that. I think that's a really important piece because essentially, if you can control where the writes happen, that's where the predictability comes if the graph is able to propagate. And we have something called glitch free, which means that when you do an update, each node in the graph updates once with the correct value. So it's like in order. And that propagation is not that different than like a render in like React or something. It's just, we have the same kind of unidirectional flow. It's a directed graph. And I think a lot of people don't see it like that. They worry that we're introducing chaos. And I think that's like the first misconception about signals. And I think the second big misconception about signals is that like just adding them to your tool or framework, you're like, now I'm fast. Like now I've done it. Like in 2021, everyone was like adding signals to their libraries,
Right.
which is a good thing because there is some DX improvements when you can control it. Like almost, it sends a lot of React state libraries are like signals libraries. People add state libraries to React to make it easier to manage stuff. But if you think about it, React still has to do its rendering. So while you can pinpoint which components you want to rerun, it's still another system on top of what React does. And what Solid did that was truly different was we removed the other system. We use signals to build the whole system from the ground up. And for that reason, we could get the performance gains because we weren't just feeding into another system. It wasn't something additive. We took something away. And I think this has been the biggest misconception where people have. They're like, okay, I can just add my signals to React. Well, it doesn't really work like that. You're not going to, there's a difference between like practical performance, which is like effectively like how well you can write your user code and make sure it works. I think that's honestly the most important. And that's actually, you may or may not gain from signals, but the ceiling of the framework itself is going to be defined by its own change system. So in the same way that like the React compiler doesn't really make React faster, it makes your code faster. This is like the inverse. If if you add signals to React, it can't make React faster. But if you write a system based on signals, then you can actually make the framework faster. And it took a while for that to be kind of realized or understood. And I don't think the general audience understood, but other framework authors did. And there's a reason that maybe they started by adding signals, but that's not the full story. The actual benefit from signals is actually the fine-grained rendering. The thing that they might have had signals before, but then Svelte 5, for example, with runes, that is an example of fine-grained rendering like Solid. View Vapor. Views had basically signals since the dawn of time, but when they haven't leveraged it in the same way that we do in Solid until the new, I think it's coming out this year, maybe beginning next year, to this new system, right? And I think that's the other thing people don't understand. So between kind of past issues with like misconceptions of like, maybe valid based on how things used to be, because this technology has been around for a while, and where it can go now, there's actually quite a gap where like people have kind of learned the wrong things over time. And I think it's important to kind of clarify that.
I remember coming to Solid as a React developer. The thing that blew my mind the most was, what do you mean the component only renders once? And I was just like, wait, then how does, what? And that was, you must get that a lot.
Yes. I mean, it's one of those funny things that like we've gotten so programmed into the React model that we think of it as normal. And there are a lot of systems where that is normal. Like when you build video games, like it's called immediate mode rendering, where you just like re-render the scene graph every 60 seconds or sorry, 6 times a second or whatever to get the FPS. But the thing is, the DOM is retain mode. The DOM, if you just go and write your app, think about what you do with like jQuery or something. You create some DOM elements, and if you modularize it and call it a component or something, you might just like make some code that makes some DOM elements, and then you'll add some event handlers to it. And then when you click the event handler, you update some DOM. What we're doing with Solid is not that different. We're automating some of those events updates by using reactivity to tie it into like our JSX templates. But essentially, when you call the component first time, it creates all the DOM elements, and then so that you don't want to recreate them all every time.
Yeah, it's a beautiful mixture of declarative and imperative, sort of. I mean, it means it's declarative, but the listening of the signals goes and does the thing. Nice. What sort of tooling patterns have emerged recently that make it easier to develop fine-grained reactive code?
This is still an area that's kind of very much under development, but I've been really happy to see because of, as I said, Vue and Svelte and other communities actually kind of jumping on board. Angular, actually a big one, that we've started to see progress here, right? I mean, obviously a lot of the standard tooling, like, like the linters and stuff, can tap into that. We've seen a lot of improvement, even though this doesn't affect Solid directly, but into like stuff like Volair and stuff where you can actually like for templates like add TypeScript to like basically stuff other than JSX, has really helped with this, because like types with reactivity also something to consider. But I think the most interesting thing that I've been seeing happening on tooling is stuff that some of the research we've been doing into dev tools. When you have a reactive graph, there's like this extra visual, and with like say Solid dev tools, we can actually trace, like when you update some state in your app, you can actually see all the places it impacts. Dev tools, cool. I think it's really just the start of it. Like that's a visual representation, so you can kind of see it in your applications. But what stops us from using that in the IDE? Like getting to a point where like, because you've written the code and I know AI might not understand signals completely yet today. Like you can just regurgitate, our code. I think it's more interesting that there's future where knowing the dependencies, knowing what changes and how to, all attaches in your app could actually, help even before that compile happens, so to speak, like before you actually commit any code or like look at it, just simply because you're building the graph yourself by the active coding. So I think it's very interesting, like the potential, like there's this whole like, shift left. You want to know sooner when you have errors. Like, we build all this stuff into our IDEs now. I think the potential of this knowledge is something kind of more unique to our solution, and it barely being tapped at.
Right. So sort of like the right click and go to references or whatever, but like go to references all the way down the graph would be cool.
Right, exactly. And be like, this is changing or this is not changing. Show me where or why. I think like we've been seeing tooling like this emerge on the React side in terms of like, why does it re-render? Like the great work by Aiden from Million was doing like lots of these performance things. I think the amount of like knowledge and depth you can get from signals would be incredible, especially when like we're talking in a world that we're getting into async. Having the asynchronicity of the graph, like you as a developer are giving us, like it gives the framework knowledge and it gives the dev tools knowledge. Like there's so much potential here that I'm obviously talking about future things here, but it's really quite powerful.
I assume the adoption of TypeScript has helped with that.
Yeah, I mean, in
is TypeScript smart enough to understand what signals are?
To a degree. I think one of the challenges is JavaScript as a language is a mismatch of a whole bunch of different things, right, which lets us get away with a lot of stuff. And a lot of the stuff around signals is data flow language type stuff. It's more in some ways similar to hardware design, like digital circuit stuff like VHDL or Verilog. I know that's kind of not everyone's familiar with those languages, which means that TypeScript doesn't actually have certain concepts like idempotent functions or things like for TypeScript, every time you call a function, it thinks that it returns a different value, which makes things a little bit challenging.
Right.
So like TypeScript has helped because, I love that I can just like literally pick JSX off the shelf.
Yeah.
And it basically works, but it has also been a challenge because I want to go beyond JavaScript. I think a lot of the frameworks want to go beyond what JavaScript does today. And for us, we're actually one of the most, I know this is kind of controversial, but I'd say we're one of the most just JavaScript frameworks. Our use of the compiler is actually very minimal compared to other. We compile JSX, nothing else. All your other code is runtime.
Yep.
But if you look at
everything's going compiler these days.
Exactly. Obviously, Svelte, Vue has its template stuff, and even like they were playing. I don't think they went ahead with it, but there was stuff they were looking at doing actually in their script tags as well. And then there's obviously the React compiler, big one. It's one of those funny areas where it's like, do you view it as an optimization or do you view it as like what you write is not what you get? I mean, we're kind of used to that in JavaScript. Everything's transpiled. Like at a certain point, like what you're seeing isn't like, there's a lot of really clever
the code
tricks
that's running.
Yeah, there's a lot of clever tricks. Like I tried to dissect the React compiler for a while to see how it worked, and I'd put console logs in because that's usually how I'd like show differences with signals libraries. I'd be like, look, if I put this console log in, it only runs here where it doesn't run in here, and you could show the differences. The React compiler is like so smart that it looks at it and goes, oh, this is a console log, so it's like a side effect. So we know to hoist it out. So if you find a block of code that you think shouldn't run every time and the compiler should auto memoize, if you put a console log in it, the compiler will automatically push it out of the like memoized block, put it top level, so it logs every time. So in a sense, if you look at the code, it should log every time because because you're just calling a function that runs over and over again. But the code right next to it doesn't run every time because it's auto memoized. So like they're very good at covering the abstraction, but that's the kind of weird world we're living in now, where it's like maybe we're okay with that. Like if the extraction's good enough, then no one has to worry about the underlying details. I'm going to mention AI again. If we're in a world where maybe we don't need to understand how everything works, we can get farther. I am still a nuts and bolts guy.
It's trade-offs, yeah. So as far as leaning into compiler stuff, do you have any opinions yet on Ripple?
It's a new framework, so I've definitely caught my eye. It was created by Dominic Ganaway, previously Svelte, previously React core team. So definitely, I think the templating for it is one of the most interesting things. I worked also for a while on a framework called Marco from eBay, and they had actually different syntax, but very similar capabilities with the templating, where you could literally just stick expressions anywhere inside to declare state. It becomes WYSIWYG. You can like cut and paste blocks, especially with Marco because it's a single file component. So literally the top of the file is HTML, and you can just put your state in and you can just move it. So from that perspective, I think Ripple's really interesting. I think like Marco, it's hard for people to wrap their heads around the benefits of that kind of templating. So the DX thing is
new things are always hard
to wrap. I know we have experience. So the thing is, I was part of a team that basically had this mechanism for years and couldn't sell people on the benefit of it. So it's a challenge. I think what's also interesting that people don't always see is that Ripple has a completely different approach yet again. They don't use signals and they don't use quite a traditional virtual DOM. They have this kind of granular update system that is built into the kind of like component DOM hierarchy. So it's not as separate as something like signals, but it has a lot of the same characteristics. I think that's very novel, and I think it's can be interesting from a technology standpoint. That part is less obvious to your end developer, but two very interesting things that I definitely want to like see and learn from.
And it's good for people to be trying new things.
Always,
because that's how we get innovation.
Completely. So, like any of these libraries, there's so many frameworks that come out all the time, but they never get anywhere. People always talk about the JavaScript fatigue. The truth of the matter is you don't have to worry about the JavaScript fatigue because if the thing doesn't catch on, it'll never get to you anyways. But people constantly creating is a good thing. And they all have varying degrees of how far they get along the path. And eventually the right combination of things gets it to that next step. Right. So there's nothing bad about new JavaScript frameworks.
Cool. Git Nation people have given me this deck of cards for you to randomly choose a question.
Okay.
So hope you get lucky.
Probably the hard questions. In today's dev world, does personal brand matter more than skill? Oh, that's a good question for me, because this is like
very good question for you.
Because this is something that I like struggle with and I push against, because like a lot of times you'll see this online. People like on Twitter will basically be selling stuff they haven't even created yet, just on the power of their brand. And I'm literally the opposite person. I mean, that is my brand. My brand is, if I have a brand, is like, it's funny. I get away with saying a lot of harsh things because people know where it comes from.
Right. I have built this.
It's funny. I sometimes like I don't usually receive the backlash because generally I hold myself to the same standard and I keep on working on it. I'm a very much I need to see it to believe it kind of person. I want I'm a benchmark person. I mean, I know benchmarks don't represent the world, but it means that like you need to have the ability to prove what you have. And in the world we live in now, that's not like how you get funding. Like the VC angle is almost pulled too far in now that it's getting down to projects. Like if you want something to succeed, you have to actually almost sell it before you have anything, like most companies.
Yeah, that's where the marketing department is always selling stuff
And
the engineers haven't built yet.
that's not me. I prove the concept, there's that, make it work, make it right, make it fast,
Yeah.
which is a great idiom for a product team. I kind of throw that in the wind always. I'm just like, make it fast. And if it's not fast enough, it's not worth pursuing. Like, that's the kind of thing. Like, I'm not going to be the person like, oh, we'll get there and make it right or correct, or make it fast one day. I'm not interested. My pragmatism is I need it to be performant before. So like, I'm very much like, I need to figure out what mechanically I'm doing. And that makes it very hard. I do think brand's important. I think this is something personally that I've struggled with because I haven't had the same kind of, I started with no reputation. I wasn't part of a different community.
Right.
That's a huge leg up when you're already in React. Look at all the developers you have access to. That's why I love working with people like Tanner Lindsley, who really gets the React community and has been a beacon there.
Indeed.
But,
So how do you know what is fast enough? Like when you click a button, how many milliseconds is it acceptable to update some other piece on the page?
I mean, usually it's architectural, so it's not that. But yeah, I mean, it is. You're right. There's always a limit, and this is something I sometimes suffer from. I will sometimes go chasing unicorns, so to speak, because I need to conceptually agree that I've got the best approach and vet it any way possible before I proceed. So yes, there is a danger of there. I generally look at real world experience. I worked on product teams, and I both on I worked at product teams doing like very social media. My old stuff I originally worked on was like almost like an Instagram kind of stuff. That's like that signals. I said I worked on product for 7 years, so like that. And then I also worked at eBay where it was just like how fast can you get the page up, and working a framework there puts a lot of pressure on performance.
E-commerce has to be fast.
So I understand what those numbers and metrics look like. And from that experience, I kind of get it benchmark. Like I'm not going to chase the last bit of reactivity performance if it's not going to update make a difference on how fast the DOM updates. But I am going to look architecturally, like if we're making decisions that cause waterfalls, or, even if they're on the server only. Sorry, that's a bad stab at something. But like I'm going to look at these things systematically, not just in the micro sense when I talk about optimization. And I think that it's led me to great places. It's how, blending that DX, like it's how we came up with server functions and solid start back in 2022. It's how I realized that we could do single flight mutations. Once the technology is there, I realized what we needed to solve these architectural problems, and this kind of went with it from there.
So you've recently joined Sentry. What are you working on there? And how I said, if you, as much as you can disclose.
No, the thing is, I love the patronage I've been getting from, there's certain companies out there that really, really support open source. And Sentry is one of those companies. Amazing. David, it's not just like him hiring me to let me work on Solid. He's also behind Syntax. Like it's his group at Sentry. Funds for he started a fund where he's like collecting money from companies to support open source, doing like little swag bags for them, but like trying to like push it. These kind of efforts, supporting the documentaries, supporting conferences, these are all really important things because everyone uses the software. They use it for free. People need to live.
Yep.
And Sentry lets me work on this stuff, lets me do this R&D, lets me promote Solid, lets me be here today. Hugely grateful. Previously, I was with Netlify with a similar deal, another great company that understands the importance of the open web. And I'm so blessed to be able to work on this stuff.
It's like corporate philanthropy for open source funding is so difficult of a task.
There's only like a few options. Like you either work for a company that might use your technology, but then you're kind of stuck by their like what their goals are.
Right.
You might be in a situation where you have to maybe go VCs for money and start your own company, but then you're beholden to like to make profit or do something. You have to like find a different product.
Yep.
This, then you can try and get like a bunch of sponsors like Open Collective and do it kind of organic way. And a few have succeeded. The Vue community is classic. Evan managed to find funding through lots of different sources. And it's quite amazing. For every case like that, there's been a lot of places where that didn't work. Like stuff like Babel ends up like used by literally everyone, but the sponsorship
But
just
no one wants to pay for it. Yeah.
So like it's really tricky. So when you have that company that was like, look, you're not our direct product, but you're under a stable, I call it patronage basically model.
Exactly.
It's amazing because like it really lets us do what we need to do. We're not influenced by the like what the company's goals are that much. Obviously, if we can find opportunities to work together, we will. But it's like it's not like they control the governance. It's still open out there, and we get to do what we do, which is important for everyone. It's really, I mean, from my side, it seems like a very noble endeavor from their point. I know they're hopefully getting something out of it, but it feels really great.
So you haven't rewritten their entire web app into SolidJS?
No. But obviously, if with Sentry integrations and stuff, I get with all I can, help out, where I can.
It's really beautiful, especially for these companies where their target is other developers, and to get their name associated with an exciting framework has got to be good for the bottom line. Makes sense.
I hope so. I mean, it's great. It's great for me. So I'm very thankful to Sentry.
How has your experience been so far at JS Nation?
Well, it's still a little bit early, but honestly, I always love coming to these events. I've been to the Amsterdam ones. This is my first time to New York location. The site's beautiful. I'm literally look at this. Yeah, I'm always so excited because you always know when you come here that there's like a good audience. It's actually the QA session that I look forward to the most. The last time when I was in Amsterdam, I walked off stage and I went to the QA booth. And they had to kick me out of the QA booth because the next QA person had to come in.
Nice.
I had people talking to me for the next like 2 hours. I kid you not directly. I eventually had to like back away and like sneak into the speaker's room. But the type of excitement and passion about front end that I find here and like these technologies is unmatched. And I'd come back every chance I could.
Amazing. Well, thanks to JS Nation.